Hello, my name is Emily Kosick, and I'm the Knowledge Manager for the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment. Welcome to today's session, PSPNET, Following a Client's Journey from Start to Finish. Before we get started today, there are just a few housekeeping notes that I want to go through. You are in listen-only mode, and that is to limit the feedback and noise. Today's session is being recorded, and you will be sent a copy tomorrow. If you miss anything, you can watch it again. The GoToWebinar launch window can be blocked by some organizations, so if you're having trouble hearing or seeing, you may have to join us by phone. Lastly, we will be looking for audience questions at the end of the session, so please send us your questions throughout in the questions box, or be ready to use the raise your hand function to ask a question at the end. Now, I'd like to welcome our presenter for today, which is Dr. Jody Burnett, and she is a member of the PSPNET team. Thank you so much for being here today, Jody.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me and spending a bit of your morning with me. So I'm going to get things loaded up here.
Okay.
If I can. There we go. Okay.
Good.
And let me know, Emily, if you can see everything the way it needs to be seen. It's back. Does that one look okay? Or I think we're backwards.
I'll just swap the presenter view. And
there we go. I think that should do it.
Let's see here. Just give me a second. There
yeah,
we go.
I just did that. Does that look okay to you? Or are you still seeing me? There we go. Perfect. Good. Okay. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to spend the next hour with you or so, thereabouts. My name is Dr. Jody Burnett. I'm a registered psychologist and I've been with PSPNET now for the last 3 years. I've been working with public safety personnel and their families for a good portion of my career, about 17 years. And so I'm really excited to be able to share some of the work that we're doing with PSPNET with you today from a little bit of a different lens, a little bit of a different perspective. So following a client's journey from start to finish. So really looking at what the client experiences. And the agenda today is pretty clear cut. I just want to give you a little bit of background on PSPNET and our team and what we do, how you might access our services. And then we'll get into some of the client experiences, like I said, from when they start the program right through to when they finish, and then also beyond, looking at even some of our overall program outcome measures. So a little bit more about PSPNET. We're comprised of a really diverse and highly skilled team. We're just, I haven't ever worked on such a wonderful and cohesive team. And it really starts with great leadership. Dr. Heather Hedges-Stravopoulos is our principal investigator and has extensive experience with internet-delivered cognitive behavior therapy. And Dr. Nick Carlton is our co-investigator, and Nick has specialized in helping public safety personnel and understanding their needs across Canada. And so it's really wonderful to have that leadership and then a team that supports everything from the clinical therapeutic side of things to research and evaluation to management and HR to administrative needs, and IT needs. We all work just like a well-oiled machine, and it's just it's really great to be part of such an amazing team. So a little bit of background. Heather had created, was the founder of what we call the online therapy unit here in Saskatchewan. And they've been delivering services to the general public since 2010. And again, it was an internet-delivered cognitive behavior therapy platform that was intended to help folks with symptoms like depression and anxiety to find ways to manage those symptoms in a healthier way, but being able to do it from the comfort and privacy of their home. And so, not only have their outcomes been incredibly successful in terms of patient satisfaction and things like that, but also in terms of symptom improvement and management. And that's really, really important because when we look comparatively, the outcomes we see from ICBT or internet delivered cognitive behavior therapy, which I will refer to as ICBT, so just so you're aware what I'm referencing, we see it as comparative to outcomes that we would see in face-to-face clinical settings. And that's really, really encouraging because the benefit of being able to offer mental health services in this type of platform, one is really increasing accessibility for folks. and how that kind of lended itself to the experiences of public safety personnel is to really understand what some of the barriers were that they have been experiencing historically in terms of accessing care. And so when Nick and Heather got together, that was a really key point of their conversation, is how could we develop, and build off the success of something like the online therapy unit and develop it to meet the needs, the unique needs of public safety personnel. And so that's really how this idea came to fruition. And they were successful in gaining funding from the federal government's action plan on post-traumatic stress, and were able to pilot PSPNET. So initially it was piloted here in Saskatchewan and then eventually in Quebec, so that we could offer it in both official languages in Canada. And some of the first work that I did, and also my colleague, Dr. Amélie Fournier in Quebec, was to go out across our provinces and talk to people on the ground in all different sectors. So we really wanted to engage folks who were actively working or who had formerly worked in these positions. So in paramedicine and fire and policing and corrections, border services, communications, and everything in between, civilian positions. We really wanted to get an understanding of what their experiences were and how we could build PSPNET to really reflect their needs. So the public safety personnel umbrella really encompasses, like I said, those big 6 sectors. But again, there's lots of folks in between. We have, the coroner's office, and we have civilian members from the RCMP, for example, maybe, folks who write up the reports. And so there's a lot of different, public safety roles that are encompassed under that umbrella. And so for PSPNET, we serve folks who are current or former public safety personnel that worked full-time, part-time, or volunteer. And initially this was only available in Saskatchewan and Quebec, but we are now expanding. And there's a lot of interest across Canada looking to see how people can access the service for their members and their staff. And so right now we've just made some expansion to PEI in New Brunswick. And then there are a lot of conversations with many provinces and territories right now. And so hopefully additional provinces and territories will be coming soon. But so keep checking. But the goal is to provide the service hopefully nationally one day. So a few highlights of the PSPNET program. One is that we're free. So that is, knocks down a fairly significant barrier right out the gate. We also do not require a referral. And this is really important, particularly when it relates to accessibility and confidentiality, is that there is another level of anonymity there. If you don't have to go down and get documentation filled out, such as a referral, etc., it really does streamline the process and allow people to maintain that level of anonymity, which is really, really important. Particularly, we see this amongst public safety personnel. And that also increases accessibility. Something that folks can if they have a laptop, a tablet, a cell phone, if they can access it from wherever they are, it increases the odds that they're going to be able to reach out and get the support that they need. So accessibility is huge. Confidentiality is another big one, and it's really important to PSPNET. We know that trust amongst PSP is just paramount, and I know this in working in this field for as long as I have, that it's really, really important that people trust the service that's being offered. And there's a lot of services that are available right now, and a lot of stuff, particularly since the pandemic, that's being offered to people. And I'm really hoping that over time, people now have come to recognize PSPNET as a trusted source. And one of the #1 questions I often get when I'm doing presentations related to confidentiality is, well, do you send a list of participants or clients that have completed the course back to the employer? And the answer is unequivocally no. Not only would that be unethical, but it's against all principles of confidentiality. But it's good that I do these presentations so that people can understand that is not going to happen, and that by accessing the support, your privacy is upheld. You also do not require a diagnosis, and this is also key because oftentimes, particularly I find with public safety personnel, they don't think they're severe enough, and it's also a question I get asked quite frequently. And so it's really important for folks to know that PSPNET supports a wide range of folks. So people who might have very mild symptoms, people who might have kind of middle of the road, moderate symptoms, and also people who have more severe or complex symptoms. And so I think, oftentimes we find that, we're just trying to kind of grind it out and see if it gets better. And we end up waiting until we do get kind of in that red zone and we are, in a more severe state. One of the things that I'd like to highlight is that PSPNET is also, and we support those folks who are in a more severe symptomatic state, but I want to make it clear that we also support people who might have milder symptoms, but could really use the tools and the strategies in the course to better prepare themselves or give them more confidence so that when the storms of life do hit, they're more prepared and are able to keep themselves in a healthier place mentally. So I always like to highlight that because it's something that we want folks to understand. So in terms of inclusion and exclusion, as I've said, current or former public safety personnel are eligible that self-report with problems of anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress symptoms. Again, these don't have to be, what some would say, well, I'm not bad enough, or I don't want to take up a spot. And again, that's not the case. We want to be able to provide a platform of service that all people can access, all public safety personnel can access, whether again, the mild symptoms or they're more complex. You must be 18 years of age or older to access the course. Comfortable using and having access to the internet, so nothing too crazy. I mean, it's really just being able to log into our secure platform and point and click your way through the different components. Willing to provide a local medical contact in case of emergencies. So the way in which our program or platform is set up, obviously we're not seeing clients face to face, and so when we do have clients that are higher risk, or in the event that symptoms do increase, into kind of a dangerous zone, we want to make sure that we have the ability to help coordinate care in those circumstances. So we do talk with clients that are admitted into our program to say, listen, this is something that we like to have on file. We would always receive consent from the client, written consent, to release any information to their medical or healthcare practitioner, but that if things were to become quite urgent, we would be able to help coordinate care for them. So that's to minimize risk and to keep folks safe. Another, in terms of eligibility, you must live in one of the eligible provinces where the service is provided. So in terms of exclusion, I mean, we assess on a case-by-case basis. So this is kind of a broad, recommendation. Typically, if there was a client that had severe, problems with alcohol or drugs, to the point that it would impair their ability to, work through the course, work through the contents at an independent level, we might suggest they go to detox or they get some types of addiction counseling, and we would help to direct them to those types of referral sources. And it's the same thing with, some other severe mental symptoms such as mania or psychosis that isn't currently managed. So again, this wouldn't be the best or most appropriate support for them, and we would want to make sure that we help them connect with the most appropriate support. Another thing to point out is that we are not a 24-hour crisis intervention support. So even though clients can access the content, they can log in and access the materials for 24 hours a day, we are not staffed to provide that level of care. So if there's someone who's in immediate need and is, let's say actively suicidal, this would not be the most appropriate support for them. We would want them to get to urgent care or some urgent crisis intervention supports. And again, once stabilized, I'm not saying down the road that this couldn't be an option for them, but in those instances, we want to make sure that they get the most appropriate care, and this wouldn't probably be the best support for them, so that's why we refer out, okay? So we have a couple of courses right now. One is our well-being course, and we call it transdiagnostic, and that's just a fancy way to say that it addresses a number of symptoms that exist sometimes at the same time. So sometimes people will present with some depression or low mood. They've got some, symptoms related to post-traumatic stress. They might have some social anxiety. This is a program that is well positioned to tackle all of those types of symptoms that they might be experiencing. And so there's 5 lessons offered over the course of 8 weeks. That said, we heard loud and clear when we did those interviews with folks that they wanted flexibility, and primarily because of the nature of the work of PSP. We have things like shift work, etc., that sometimes can complicate schedules. So nothing is always, linear in the PSP world. So we wanted to make sure to account for that. So some people do get through the program, the course, in 8 weeks, and others take 11 weeks, and some take 14 weeks. And we really want to be able to meet people where they're at and make sure that they get, the time that they need to complete the course. So, but in its entirety here, lessons 1 to 5 typically take 8 weeks. Lessons 2 and 4, we provide 2 weeks each for those lessons because there's a little bit more, there's quite a bit more skill in those 2 particular lessons that require some intentional practice and time to practice and integrate into their day-to-day lives. Lessons 1, 3, and 5 are 1 week long. So each lesson is comprised of a few things. There's content, obviously, in terms of understanding the skills and some information content. And then there's also a lot of really practical examples and stories. And the stories are really powerful. These are based on the experiences of clients who've gone through the course and have shared those. And we find, and we've heard really great feedback from clients who've completed the course and read these stories and gone through them. And we even had feedback from stakeholders initially in the early stages of our launch to help us say, are these representative? Are these, can you relate to these? And a lot of people going through and experiencing symptoms of trauma or anxiety or depression can be a very isolating and lonely experience. And so to read some of these stories and see themselves in the stories and be like, holy smokes, like that's exactly what I have felt, or that's exactly what I've thought. It really can start to break down some of that isolation and feeling like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? That kind of reflection. So it's really got kind of, it's very comprehensive, each lesson. Lesson 1 focuses on education. So this is really about, evoking some self-awareness. It's really hard to make some changes when we're not really sure what the heck's going on. So it really focuses on understanding, how our symptoms, our cycle of symptoms, we refer to it as, operate. And so, how our thoughts will evoke some physical sensations and experiences, and how those will factor into our behaviors. And so helping to understand some of that and just take stock of what's been going on can really, really be helpful for folks. Lesson 2 is focused on what we call thought challenging. And again, the skills embedded in each of the lessons are based on cognitive behavior therapy. And so thought challenging is obviously quite significant because in cognitive behavior therapy, just as it kind of implies, thoughts are king. And so a lot of times, all of us have thoughts, kind of ping-ponging around in our head. Some are helpful, some are not so helpful, and sometimes they're so bloody automatic that we don't even recognize how impactful they are in terms of how we feel and how we behave. And so lesson 2 really starts to help people understand, not only what thoughts that they're having and how impactful they are, but also how we can start to shift or reframe them, for a positive or more healthy outcome, and how connected they are into the experience of our symptoms. So that's what lesson 2 really focuses on. Lesson 3 focuses on the physical symptoms that we often experience related to something like, depression or anxiety. And I've had many clients over the years, actually the first symptoms that they noticed in terms of recognizing that something was going on within themselves were the physical symptoms, and many had actually went to emerge thinking they were having a heart attack and ended up having a panic attack. And that's what they were having. And so sometimes it's the manifestation of physical symptoms first that kind of presents itself, and then we kind of work backwards to figure out, well, what the heck is triggering that. And in reverse, sometimes we also have thoughts that can then evoke a physical response in ourselves. So and again, it differs for depression and anxiety. So anxiety, it might be you feel amped up all the time, your heart is racing, you're sweating, you feel nauseous. On the flip side, you might feel lethargic and fatigued and withdrawn, no energy, no motivation. if you were experiencing more depressive symptoms. So again, understanding these and how you're, what's happening between your mind-body connection is really important. And then also knowing that there's some skills and tools you can use to be able to mitigate or turn the volume down, so to speak, on some of those symptoms you're experiencing. Lesson 4 is focused on a lot of avoidance behavior. Sometimes when we have an increase of symptoms, we do tend to, kind of shut down or pull away from sometimes the things that at one time kept us quite healthy. And so for activity scheduling, for example, is really useful for people who maybe once were really active and used exercise as an outlet, for example, and over time, for whatever reasons, maybe through the experience of their symptoms, that's kind of gotten eroded away and it's not part of their routine anymore. And so even just finding ways to reintroduce an activity like that can really help to kind of prop us up or help us manage or deal with the symptoms we're experiencing in a much healthier way. And then lesson 5 is on relapse prevention, and this really helps in terms of long-term sustainability. That's the end goal, is to give people the tools and skills that they need to help them, long-term, to see a reduction in symptoms and then be able to maintain, the healthy management of those symptoms. So it's really like a game plan. It's helping people to understand not only what their supports are and when to access them, but also what might trigger them. So, for many of us, I know for myself, if I am working too many hours and I'm, maybe getting run down and there's stress in the home and then I'm not working out as much as I normally do, those would be times where I could have a potential relapse, right? If I'm aware of that, I'm in a much better position to put some things in place to avoid a full relapse and going back to not only an increase in symptoms, but also, the unhealthy coping mechanisms maybe that I used to use. So these are all things that are really important in terms of sustaining that long-term success. You'll see in the bottom right corner, there's a list of what we call additional resources. And there's a number of topics here. So some on sleep, some on anger, enhancing relationships with significant others. These all came, the topics were derived, again, from those interviews that we had with a number of public safety personnel at the onset of PSPNET's creation. And the reason why they're so important is, again, they're representative of what many people said that they would love to have more information on. These are things that they were struggling with. And so these really complement the lessons. Clients can read what's relevant to them. They don't have to read them, but they really do provide another layer of education, another set of resources that can accompany the main lessons. Our second course is called the PTSD course. And it's very similar to the well-being course in terms of skills and strategies and things like that based on cognitive behavior therapy. The lessons are shifted a little bit to represent the needs of folks dealing with post-traumatic stress symptoms. So for example, you'll see managing physical symptoms is now bumped up to lesson 2. And partly that's because sometimes when people are experiencing significant symptoms from post-traumatic stress, those are some of the first things that are cropping up, right? And so being able to have that kind of on the front end, we just adjusted it to meet the needs of clients dealing with these types of symptoms. To identify what course would I go into? Well, our team will work on that with you, and we'll explore that more today. But really, it's for folks whose chief complaint or main concern is truly related to symptoms of post-traumatic stress. It doesn't mean you need a diagnosis of PTSD by any means, but it just means that this is kind of the main presentation of your symptoms, and so we would identify if we thought this would be the best course for them. So the application process is pretty slick. You go to the PSPNET website. You would click apply now, which we're going to walk through in a couple of minutes here. You'll answer a couple basic screening questions. It will prompt you to create an account. Once that's created, you'll log in. You'll complete a questionnaire package that gives us a nice little picture of where you're at and what's going on. And then it'll prompt you to set up a telephone screen with one of our team members. And then one of our team members would contact you on the day and time of your choice to go over your assessment with you. I'm going to talk about this in detail, so please know that. I'm just giving you a nice little overview as we move into that next piece. Okay, so we'll look at that account creation just in a tiny bit more detail, just so you can actually see what it looks like. So if you went to the website, this is what it would look like. You would click on Apply Now. And there's a screen where it would prompt you to put in some information, your email. It would have you pick a password. And then, and just a note here, sorry, I'll get to that in 1 second. Just a note here that it will allow you to select in English or French. So again, this is offered in both official languages. And we recommend that you use Firefox or Google Chrome. This works best with the application, okay? So you'll have, there's a screen where you'll enter some information, you'll create a password, and then a username is emailed out to you, and that will allow you to log into the system. Okay. Once you've logged into the system, you're going to see what's called a pre-screen self-enrollment. Okay, and again, you can pick in English or French, and then once you click on that, it's going to take you first to the consent form, which is really important to make sure that that is paramount, that you're comfortable with that you're completely informed. And then once you've completed that, it'll take you through a number of questionnaires. And I know for some folks, it's like, oh my goodness, like, you know, how many questions can you ask? But this really is preparing to give us a nice snapshot. So in terms of the assessment process, in the same way as, you know, if I were to see someone face to face, there is an intake process or an assessment process that we go through. And partly that's so that, you know, we can become acquainted and I know what your needs are and where things are at. And so in the same way, this gives us a nice picture of you know, the symptoms that you might be experiencing, any medical or mental health background, you know, those kinds of things. And we've even added, you know, we're continuously improving things. And so when the pandemic hit and we were seeing that clients were really impacted by the effects of the pandemic, we also added a questionnaire about COVID. And this is important because, again, it's relevant to the client's experience right now. You know, hopefully one day we'll be able to take that off and we'll be done with this pandemic. But for now, it's really, really important that we include it because it's so front and center in our worlds right now, particularly for public safety personnel. So once you've completed the questionnaires, and it probably takes, you know, about 45 minutes. So if you're gonna, you know, sit down to apply, you know, please know that it will take a little bit of time, but it's worth the investment because, again, it helps to give us a nice picture of where you're at. Once that's completed, it will prompt you to book a telephone screen with one of our team members, okay? And so it'll bring up a CoConnect calendar link, and you can go ahead and do that. Okay, and it'll ask you if you have a preferred staff member. Again, if you've selected to do this in English, for example, make sure that you click on the one that says English, that you want someone that speaks English. Okay, and so you'll pick a date and time that works for you. And if for some reason that date and time needed to change, you can absolutely call in or go back into the link that's been provided and switch your date. That's totally fine. Okay, and so once that happens, then that we get notification of that, and one of our team members then will really begin the full assessment process with you. Okay, so again, just to recap, you've completed, as you see here, the online application, the pre-screen questionnaires, which again gives that demographic information, your medical and mental health history. It's looking at different symptom measures. These fancy little examples here, the PHQ-9, it measures symptoms of depression. The GAD-7 measures symptoms of anxiety. The PCL, for example, measures symptoms of trauma. The DAR measures symptoms of anger, and on and on. So there's a number of screens that we use, again, to give us that nice comprehensive picture of what you're experiencing. Then you move into the telephone assessment. So on that date and time of your choice, one of our team members will call you, and they're going to go through, they've already gone through your questionnaires, they've summarized it, and they're going to go through each section with you just to make sure that we have the information correct. Okay, sometimes the wrong button gets clicked, so we just want to make sure that we have all of the information accurately. And then we'll talk to you about, oh, I just want to back up there. We also assess for risk. So this is really important. So there are some indications in some of the screens that, for example, the PHQ-9, question 9 of that screen will ask about self-harm and the risk of self-harm. And so those are things that we pay attention to, but we also pay attention to things like your mental health history or you know, of suicide attempts, for example, and things like that. So our number one priority is to make sure that people are safe. And so we do that as part of this assessment as well. Once that is completed, we'll talk to you about the available courses, so the well-being course and the PTSD course and the differences. We'll describe them, and we'll identify which course we think would be best. And again, if PSPNet is the most appropriate resource for you, if it's determined that maybe you're looking for something more based on what the conversation you've had with our team member, then we certainly would help make a referral for you, right? We would say, okay, well, you're looking for this. Here's where we can direct you to look at those kinds of services. So we really never leave you hanging. It's not like, oh, well, good luck to you, you don't fit here. We really want to make sure that you do get connected with the most appropriate support. Okay, so we'll either enroll you at that time or we'll look to refer you out. Okay. And the other thing, I just want to go back here super fast. The only other thing I wanted to note here is that in terms of wait times, we don't have any, and that's great news. So the way that our service is delivered, we've been able to provide almost same day access. So on your telephone screen, you can indicate if you wanted to start the next day, or if you wanted to start the next week. So you're able to pick when you're wanting to start the course, so long as it's within 30 days, because we want your data from the questionnaires to be accurate and representative, right? But this is really important because I know both in the public and the private sector right now, we're experiencing significant wait times. And so oftentimes PSPNet has been a conduit for folks who maybe are on a 6-month wait list to see a psychologist, but they want some support in the meantime. So this, PSPNet is very versatile in that we can be used, as a main support. We can be used as a support in waiting. We can be used as a step down, for example, for programs like WCB. If someone's coming out of a tertiary program and they want to kind of step down into a different level of support. So there's a lot of ways that we can be really useful and helpful. So we're going to go through a couple of case samples, clients A and B, and it's really important for me to highlight that we want to absolutely ensure the confidentiality and anonymity of the following clients. So information has been altered, so we make sure there is nothing identifiable in what we're sharing today. That's number one. Okay, so the first case sample we're going to call client A, or Abe. And this client is not a typical client that is consistent with PSPNet outcomes, but I chose it for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's good to show a bit of a different case sometimes, and also I think it's nice to show that even though you're going to see that maybe symptoms didn't decrease in the way that we normally see clients' symptoms decrease, there were still significant gains made in the experience of this client. So this was, we will say, a 43-year-old male, employed as a corrections officer for 10 years, reports being a little unhappy in his marriage, has 3 children, ages 4, 6, and 10. Mental health history, no remarkable mental health history, had recent experience of symptoms that caused him to miss several days of work. His key concern was to improve low mood and find ways to improve his marriage or communication in his relationships. He currently did not have any coping skills and felt he usually just kind of stuffs down or ignores what he feels. And motivations or strengths, he was really looking to find ways to manage his stress, anxiety, depression. Was really looking for some tools and strategies to do that, and was hopeful that that would contribute to a better quality of life. So this is a snippet. So just, when we take a client in through that assessment process, through the telephone screen, we write up a summary case note that's added to the client's electronic file in our secure platform, therapist portal. And so these are some of the things that we include. And this is, again, so just giving you a bit of a snippet about how we summarize cases, and so that we have, a concise place where all of the information is kept and we get a good sense of how the client, where the client's at. Okay. So treatment. So once the client's admitted into the program, Abe was admitted into the PSP Wellbeing course. They're immediately paired with one of our therapists. So our therapists here are highly trained. We have master's level social workers, and we have PhD level psychologists. And all of us have diverse and extensive experience, not only working with public safety personnel in many instances, but also working specifically with symptoms like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, etc. So in addition to that, we also have a very rigorous orientation training program that all therapists have to go through, ongoing supervision, ongoing training, just to ensure that that our team is top-notch. We want to provide the best quality care that we possibly can, and that's really, really important to us. So once they're into the program, they're paired with a therapist. Typically, on average, clients, kind of the standard, it's once a week support by email. We have options. So when we did those stakeholder interviews, the two modes of communication that were identified by PSP were by telephone or email. And not email to their private or their work emails. It's their email that they have to log into the secure PSPNET portal. So it's an internal embedded highly secure email that's only between the client and the therapist. And so that's where their correspondence would take place. And so typically clients can choose once to twice a week support with their therapist, and they can do that either by email or by telephone. And so they can choose that up front, but sometimes clients do alter it as time goes on. So they might start off with email and then opt to have a phone call session now and again, just because sometimes telephone for some clients can be a little bit clearer. If they're struggling with something and they just want to have talk it through with their therapist, that can be really helpful. For others, they want no part of that. They just prefer email. And the odd time, and this is an option as well, they are able to go through the course independently. So even though we still have a therapist that would oversee and monitor, there's no correspondence between the therapist and the client. And so if that's the client's request, that's also okay as well. So a few options. In this case, he opted for telephone support once a week with his therapist. And again, courses over 8 weeks, we have the ability to extend it up to 16 weeks as needed. Abe completed his course in 11 weeks. Okay, so I'm just highlighting some measures. So once you're admitted into the course, each week you're going to be asked to complete a few questionnaires. Probably takes about 3 minutes. So nothing like what you would have done in the pre-screen questionnaire package at this point. But it really does help our therapists to be able to have some indicators as to how the client is doing, how they're progressing. So in this case, Abe started out at week 1 with his depression score, the PHQ-9, you'll see there as at a 9, which is a high end of mild. His PHQ-9 question 9 was 0, and that means that he didn't indicate any risk of self-harm. He didn't have any of those types of thoughts. His anxiety questionnaire, his anxiety symptoms were indicated there at a 6, you'll see, for the GAD-7, which is mild. And his PCL, which indicates symptoms of trauma, post-traumatic stress, was at a 12, so just below the clinical threshold there. And again, so each week the client will go in and complete the questionnaires as well as a reflection. And this is another way the client, perhaps they're not wanting to expend a bunch in the email, or they don't want to talk on the phone. Sometimes they really will put quite a bit in the reflection. And the reflection asks them questions about, what they're working on, what maybe they're having a challenge with that week, or what they're finding helpful. And so it's another way that they can communicate with their therapist, but it's also another way the therapist can monitor the client's progress, so which is really great. So in the course at weeks 8, 26, and 52, we ask them to complete, ask clients to complete a larger package again. And this gives us some really nice indicators, that are consistent with the pre-screen questionnaires that they completed. It gives us a more comprehensive look at how they're doing. This isn't to research people to death, but it's really inherent to continuous improvement of the program. We want to make the program the best that it can be. We want it to be representative. And so if we don't check in with folks and see how they're doing, it's really hard for us to understand or gauge how effective our service delivery is. So we really encourage people, even though they're not active in their program at 26 and 52 weeks per se, we really encourage them to go back in and let us know how they're doing, because their feedback is so valuable. And we take that feedback and we analyze it and collate it and put it back into the findings that we have. We try to reintegrate or invest those back into the program and make changes that are going to be meaningful to the folks using our service. Okay, so you'll see a little bit more of an in-depth look here at these measures. And then we have the graph option. So it just kind of shows you his progression since, from when he started week 1 to when he ended week 11. And it was a bit of a roller coaster, right? And so again, this is not typical of the clients that move through our program. But again, I think it's interesting because someone might say, well, his symptoms didn't really go down all that much. So, is it even effective? So we'll show here. So his anxiety did go down a little bit. And same with his symptoms of trauma. But here's the kicker for me, is his self-reported gains that he included in his evaluation. So he noted that he significantly improved the recognition of his symptoms and triggers, that he had acquired more tools to manage his symptoms, that he became more active. That's a big one because we know that this is something that can be a protective factor in terms of keeping ourselves healthy, managing stress, and hence managing our symptoms in a healthier way. He also noted that he had increased confidence and also more time that he was able to dedicate to his children. So even though we might have not seen the decrease in symptoms that perhaps is actually quite consistent with our general outcomes, we did see gains made from him going through the course, which is excellent. In his treatment satisfaction, which we have clients complete, not only about their experience in the course, but also about their experience with their therapist, because that's really good learning for us. Anything that we can learn from clients' experiences to do better, we want to be able to do that. So I pulled out a couple things here. We asked what the most helpful skill was. He said becoming more active through the skill of graded exposure, and I shared that with you a little bit earlier. An example of how a skill from the course made a difference in daily life. He said he's managed to get back into the gym, which had been very difficult for him to start. That's so encouraging because again, it seems maybe minuscule, but it can really be so powerful. We know the positive effects of activity and maintaining an active lifestyle. Like I said, stress management, but also the release of those feel-good hormones that can naturally help to reduce our symptoms or turn down the volume, so to speak. So that's really, really encouraging. When we asked what he liked best about the course, he said the delivery method. So having access to the course any time of the day allowed him to work on himself after his kids went to bed. He says, without this access, I would have never had the time given my hectic work schedule. And again, I'm so encouraged by that because we know that there's a number of barriers that public safety personnel experience when attempting to seek help. Stigma is a big one, we know that. But time is a huge one. So things like, as he alluded to, shift work can really, really interfere with one's ability to dedicate time for self-care, including accessing mental health supports, right? So it was really encouraging to hear that we were able to provide him a pathway of service that met his need in that way. So in his treatment satisfaction, he also noted that it helped me gain perspective. I was able to read through the cases presented and saw things that were applicable to me and ways I can achieve the desired change. I find the course gives you a toolbox that allows you to fix the challenges we face. And again, I think too, I know as I mentioned earlier, those stories are incredibly powerful because like I said, it can become very isolating to feel like nobody else can understand what you're experiencing. And it's scary. It's scary to let somebody know what you're going through. There's a lot of pressure, particularly within the culture of public safety personnel, to grind it out, to keep it, just keep going, not to let anyone know that you're struggling, And there's also a level of fear, right? Will I get to keep my job? Will I get to, will I be judged? Will I be criticized? So there's just a lot of additional burden and fear that is associated with being in an occupation within that PSP umbrella. Okay, so we'll move on down to client B, who's a bit more of a typical case in terms of symptom improvement. But again, we'll call her client B or Betty. A 38-year-old female employed as an RCMP officer for 14 years, reports being happy in her marriage, has one child, age 2. She's been experiencing some personal issues that have been triggered by exposure to some traumas incurred at work. Mental health history. She experienced some anxiety during adolescence, felt there was definitely a cycle between that work and personal stress. And this is not uncommon, right? Sometimes it's not just, one particular incident at work that is troubling to people, but it's a cumulative effect of the things that, that public safety personnel are often exposed to on a regular basis. And also trying to reconcile that with stressors or issues or things they've got going on in their personal life. And sadly, it does sometimes become that vicious cycle, one triggering the other and really not having enough capacity to deal with either. So key concern here was finding ways to reduce symptoms and finding ways to better manage personal and professional stress. Coping was medication at that time. Noted that she felt very isolated and had lost many social supports in her work colleagues recently. I will say that during the pandemic, I have noticed that there's significantly more isolation, less opportunity for casual connections outside of work, not only with people from work, but even people from your personal life. So those are the things that sometimes can help prop us up or insulate us in times of stress. And in the instance of a pandemic, those things have been unfortunately things that we haven't been able to access, supports we haven't been able to access as readily or in the same way that we always did. So again, this is not an uncommon experience, that sense of isolation. Motivations and strengths. She said that she would like to regain the resilience she felt she had several years ago, would like some help in managing the extreme stress and her accompanying symptoms. Okay, so treatment. So Betty was also admitted into the well-being course. She opted for once-a-week email support after she was paired with her therapist. The therapist did note that she did have a few support calls that were requested by the client on occasion. And again, we do our best to meet the client's needs. So we want to make sure that if that's something that they would find helpful, that we absolutely are able to provide that and flex between telephone and email if needed. Again, course is 8 weeks long, option to extend up to 16 weeks. Betty completed her course in 9 weeks. Okay, and same thing here, just looking at her starting measures week 1. So her symptoms of depression were moderately severe. Again, no indication of suicide risk or self-harm. Her anxiety screen, the GAD-7 you'll see there, also indicated moderate symptoms of anxiety. And she had a score higher than 14 in terms of post-traumatic stress symptoms, indicating a probability of PTSD. Again, we are not here to diagnose. These are only indicators to us to understand a little more comprehensively what types of symptoms they're displaying or experiencing. Okay, and if we look at her 8-week measures, things have gotten better, which is great news. We've seen, a fairly significant drop. And again, these gives us some additional measures, which are great. And these, again, it will be followed up at 26 and 52 weeks as well. So to look at her progression through her graph, you'll see that there was a significant decrease in her symptoms of depression. So she's actually down into the just below, she's in the mild range now, minimal range, pardon me. Same with her symptoms of anxiety. So going from a moderate range back down into a minimal range, that's excellent. And same thing with her symptoms of trauma. She was just on the clinical threshold there, so but really, was able to make some fairly significant improvements there. So again, self-reported gains from Betty in her evaluation was that She noted she was able to have some concrete strategies to manage her symptoms. She had an increased level of self-awareness. And that's huge, right? Because for many people, it's really hard to make changes when you haven't really acknowledged what the heck's going on. And so that's really great to see. She noted that she had the ability to identify and change or reframe her thoughts, as we had talked about earlier. She also had increased confidence, and she was able to focus more on building some social supports. And again, that's really important long-term for sustainability, because those are some of those protective factors that help to insulate us, from the impacts of stress. So in terms of her treatment satisfaction, most helpful skill taught, thought challenging. She said being able to identify what unhelpful thoughts I was having and also how my physical symptoms were related. Seeing these things with more discernment allows me to identify them and then work to modify or reframe them. An example of how a skill from the course made a difference in her daily life, she noted that when my mind was somewhere unhelpful, I resort to grounding techniques and controlled breathing. And again, it's so awesome to see that, people are able to, acquire these tools and kind of just tuck them away. They know what they are, they know when to use them, and they have the confidence to pull them out when they start to feel symptoms arise. And that's the key to sustainable long-term, well-being and positive mental health, is knowing that it's not that stuff isn't going to happen in life and that we aren't going to be impacted or that our symptoms won't, rear their ugly heads, but it's knowing and having the confidence to use some of these skills to keep them at bay or to keep them manageable. It says, what did you like best about the course? And she indicated the content of the lessons and resources. The therapist was really helpful. I felt she truly understood what I was going through, was very attentive, and her advice or comments felt relevant. I felt she truly cared. And again, as I had mentioned earlier, that's really important to our team. I mean, we understand the unique experiences of public safety personnel, and we really want to make sure that that is conveyed in the way that we provide support and care. And her treatment satisfaction, she said, being able to put my finger on exactly what was affecting me and in what ways brought me comfort and helped me to feel more in control. Instead of being a victim to a blurry mix of emotions, symptoms, and thoughts, I was able to identify exactly which were my symptoms. Your program is bang on. I love hearing that. And this comes from a very critical person who has educated herself a lot in terms of self-help. So again, just, it's really encouraging to hear the feedback. It's just super powerful stuff, and it really helps us to know that, the work that we're doing is not only relevant but effective. Yes, our data shows us that, but when you hear it, when you hear it from clients, it's just really powerful. So now that we've gone through a couple of sample cases, I will just briefly go over a few of our outcomes as a whole. So in terms of Saskatchewan and Quebec, so just note that there's no data from PEI New Brunswick just because they're just coming on board. But in terms of our two provinces thus far, we have 342 telephone screens completed. We have 320 clients who have started treatment. We have 216 of those 320 who've completed 100% of the lesson materials, which is great. And we've only had 25 clients who've withdrawn due to change in availability or personal circumstances. And that happens. We've had clients who sometimes start and then things change at work or change at their schedule and their personal lives. But it's not, it does happen where they do tend to come back at a later date and reconnect with us. So that's encouraging news. So in terms of outcomes, I'll draw your attention to the right-hand side with the red, yellow, and blue bars. I like these because I think that they're really valuable in terms of understanding, particularly from a PSP-Net or PSP experience, pardon me. They're very honest. PSP are very honest. They will let you know if this is worth their time or not. So to see that 99% of the clients that we've served felt it was worth their time, that 98% would refer a friend, and that 87% had more confidence in managing their symptoms, that's really, really wonderful news. And we also see, in terms of symptom improvement and reduction, we're seeing outcomes that, again, are very consistent with what we would see in a face-to-face counseling setting. So again, it really tells us that we are, hitting the mark, and that the intervention and the support and the program that we're delivering is effective. So from that evaluative data that the feedback and the comments that people share with us, we have put a bit of an infographic together to highlight the top reasons why public safety personnel like PSPNET. So many have said that do-it-yourself information and exercises is quite helpful. They like the additional supplementary readings. They really like the stories and examples. And again, I think that helps to connect people and help them to feel like they see themselves in some of these examples. The course content, the format of the course, folks really like the therapist assistant, as well as the flexibility. And again, this is so important for public safety personnel because their work hours are not 8 to 4:30, and so that's constantly changing. And so the flexibility was absolutely required. So we've come to the end. I want to thank you so much for your time. I'm going to put up my our phone number here at PSPNet, as well as my direct email, so that if anybody has any questions or concerns that they'd like to talk about further offline, I am always happy to make time for you. My door is always open, so my virtual door, I guess nowadays, but I'm always happy to make some time for you and answer any questions or go over any information that you may require.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Jody, for that presentation. So I will welcome anybody to go ahead and put questions in the question box if you haven't already. I do have a couple for you.
Okay.
A couple of basic questions while you've been talking as well. First question is that they note that it's a positive that there's quick access, but they're concerned about the 45 minutes of forms for completion. Have you guys had any issues with people not wanting to complete that level of forms?
No, and I think partly it's because once and for some people it goes a lot faster. I say 45 to give a cushion. There's some people get through it in half an hour, but I think people recognize the importance and why we need to have that information to adequately assess if this is the most appropriate support for you and helping to connect you with the right resources. So if we don't have that information, sadly, it's harder for it. It would be really difficult for us to do our job, appropriately.
So I know that I know from my end that we've been talking to provinces across Canada about this, but we do have a question for somebody from BC, and I wanted to know if there's any plans to come to BC, and is there anything that they can do to help get it to BC? Anything that could be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had interest from a lot of provinces, and so almost I think every province in Canada. I think if you have a representative within government that you can speak to or bring this forward to, particularly in the area of mental health, I think that can't hurt. And certainly feel free to connect with us and stay connected with us for updates and developments as they come, because stuff is constantly changing. So like I said, there's a lot of interest about the service we're providing, and I'm really hopeful that we are able to get this across Canada at some point. That is our end goal, obviously, but we have to work individually with each province and territory to make that happen.
Okay. Do you only work with people in public safety with this program? Are they the only ones that qualify for this program?
So presently, yeah, I mean, our focus is public safety personnel, like I had said, kind of in those 6 key areas, but there's lots of bits and pieces in between. What I would suggest is if you're uncertain, don't hesitate to email us or call us to see if you would qualify. In Saskatchewan, if there are folks, for example, sometimes we'll get physicians or nurses that call in, we can refer them to the online therapy unit if you're in Saskatchewan. Now, for people who aren't in Saskatchewan, there's not that option. So, there's our focus is primarily on is public safety personnel. Again, but sometimes people don't recognize, you may have done some volunteer firework and didn't recognize that constituted. So even if you've only done it for a month, that still would qualify you as holding a former public safety personnel position. So like I said, if you're uncertain, don't hesitate to reach out so that we can give you some guidance before you go through the whole application process, only to find out then that you didn't qualify. So don't hesitate to reach out for sure.
Okay. You mentioned that you don't manage people with severe addictions and that you would refer them to like a residential program or where they are. What about moderate to severe addictions?
And this is the thing, it's a case-by-case basis, because we have had clients who, for example, have scored high in alcohol use, but upon speaking to them, they were aware of their addiction, they acknowledged that it was a problem, they were, actively seeking other coping mechanisms. And so we've been able to work with clients closely to help them and accept them into the program, working with them to reduce, their alcohol use as they gain additional healthier coping mechanisms. So there are instances where, we are, but it's a case-by-case basis, right? So, the other one is, sometimes they'll score very high for drug use, for example. But after talking to them, we see that, they're using cannabis medicinally just at bedtime. So, it's not always how it appears. Sometimes a score will be elevated, but we always talk through people's experience and what their personal individualized circumstances are. If we're able to work with them safely, we absolutely will. If we feel that another resource or support would be better or more appropriate, then we guide them to those types of services.
Do you have any difficulties getting permission to put your measures online?
No, and that's part, it's all de-identified, right? And so in terms of putting measures online, there's no identifying information, but we do try to share our outcomes so that we can show, the success of the program. And that really does help people to establish some trust because there are so many options out there right now. It's really difficult to know, to sort through, what's valid, what's not valid, what's going to be useful, what's not going to be useful. So we use an evidence-based approach to show people that these are the actual outcomes that are related to delivery, the delivery of our services. And I think that's really important that people are able to see that and not just go into a program on a whim and, well, I hope this is useful. So again, the data is always de-identified, but it's very useful to show those outcomes in terms of the success of the program.
Did any of the attendees talk about this experience versus an their EFAP program? So any of the people, the clients of PSPNET?
Everyone has a different experience. For some people coming into PSPNET, this is their first experience with any kind of mental health supports. For other people, so it's kind of like getting your feet wet, right? And oftentimes they will end up going on and accessing some additional individualized counseling or EFAP supports afterwards, because they're like, hey, you psychologists aren't all crazy. You guys might be okay to talk to. So, I'm comfortable with this now and I feel more comfortable accessing EFAP supports. On the flip side, we've had people come from EFAP who were just looking for something different. They didn't feel comfortable going to the office. They were scared of bumping into somebody else when they went to the therapist's office. So this was, an alternate platform of mental health service that they could do from the privacy of and comfort of their home. So it just really depends on a client's needs and desires at the time, right? But we do try to work with folks. There's many times where people will go through our program and, like I said, are looking for that next step, and we always will help to support them to make sure that they continue on their journey as they wish. So we'll help connect them with continued supports.
What is PSPNet's experience with co-treating with someone who is seeing another psychologist or treatment program already? Is there a collaboration or discussion between the psychologist and PSPNet to ensure that the treatments don't contradict each other?
Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't want clients doing, dual services. So if somebody was seeing a private counselor and they wanted to do PSPNet, we wouldn't advise that they did them at the same time. And partly because we're asking clients to do one thing in the program, not knowing if their therapist is from a different, theoretical orientation and they're asking them to do something else. That can be really confusing for the client. So we have had instances where clients were working with a therapist, were interested in maybe stepping down from that kind of regular support, and under the advice of their therapist or in collaboration with them said, hey, we're going to take a pause and I'm going to do PSPNet and then see where I'm at. And sometimes this is in collaboration. They'll sometimes, consent for us to discuss this with their therapist, tell them about the program, and the therapist says, yep, we'll put things on hold and you go ahead and do PSP-Net. You know, in reverse, we've had it, like I said, the other way where they've gone through a program and then continued on to do individual counseling, but certainly we wouldn't want folks doing it at the same time. So we let people know that, because we can see from that, you know, intake process, if people are actively seeing a counselor right now, these are a psychologist or social worker, we ask these questions so that we can help make sure that they're informed about what would be best going forward.
Okay, so last question for the day. The question is, I know that you mentioned that clients have a physician connection. Are you able to connect with them digitally? So I'm guessing connect with the physician digitally, or perhaps the client, you can speak to both.
Sure. I mean, so in terms of connecting with the client's, you know, family physician or care provider, like I said, they identify who that provider is. If we feel it's necessary, we can ask the client to give us consent to speak to their healthcare practitioner, and at that time we would, you know, and there's reasons that we do that. For example, if we want to say, if the client is more high risk, we might say, we'd like to let your family doctor know that you are, you know, participating in this course. In the event that you need some additional supports or assistance, they're on board and we can coordinate care. There are instances, and we do that all over the phone typically with the healthcare practitioners, particularly during COVID, right? So yeah, everything is done. I'm not sure if that's what they meant by digitally, but everything would be done typically over the phone with both the client and the care provider. I hope that answered the question. I'm not, if I'm missing something, let me know.
So we did get one last question, and I think you've answered this, but I'll answer it again. There is no cost to this for clients, right? It's absolutely free.
That's right. It's absolutely free. That's right.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Burnett. We appreciate all the great information. Again, for anybody out there, if they want to learn more about the program, they can visit the website. It's pspnet.ca, and there's all the program information is there. For everybody who joined us, thank you so much today. We do hope that you will do the short survey at the end of the webinar for us, just to give us some feedback and information on how you found the webinar and your interest in PSP-Net. Otherwise, though, have a great day, and thank you again for joining us, and take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.